All right, good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's informational webinar on the Coordinated Community Violence Intervention, or CCVI, Strategies Projects track of this year's Violence Intervention and Prevention funding solicitation. My name is Sam Cook. I am the Director of Policy and Planning at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, or PCCD, as we are more commonly known. I am joined today by a couple of PCCD colleagues who will be helping to co-present and co-facilitate this morning's webinar. That includes Zoe Miner, who is the VIP Program Manager, Crystal Lauver, apologies, Crystal, from our Office of Financial Management and Administration, and Allie Gantz, who's our Communications Director. So before we begin today's webinar, just a couple of quick housekeeping rules, the standard fare. So first, on today's webinar, you will note that this is being recorded. So we'll be posting a link to the recording on PCCD's website as soon as it becomes available. We'll also be uploading a copy of today's PowerPoint slides for reference, so don't feel like you need to scribble and take notes throughout. We encourage you to take a brief moment to check your audio settings to make sure you can hear today's presentation. Want to note that we are not able to hear you on this platform. However, you will be able to submit questions through the written Q&A feature in the Microsoft Teams Live event platform. So questions submitted through that Q&A chat function won't be immediately visible to all participants, but please rest assured that they've been received and will be reviewed by our team. As the title suggests, today's webinar session will specifically focus on the Coordinated Community Violence Intervention track of this year's VIP funding announcement. So if you're interested in learning more about the VIP application track of that grant program, we do encourage you to review the Q&A document that's on our website. And we also hosted an informational webinar on that track yesterday. So a recording of that webinar and slides will also be available on our website for reference. So you'll be able to watch yesterday's session and today's session on demand on our website moving forward. So with all of that in mind, we'll just go ahead and dive right in. So during today's session, we'll be providing a brief overview of PCCD, as well as some information on some recent trends related to community violence in Pennsylvania. We'll then cover some basic information about VIP funding before we dive into this year's VIP grants funding announcement, where we'll be touching on some of the differences and distinctions between the CCVI track compared to the VIP application track. We'll then be sharing some tips and best practices for navigating the application process successfully. This year's application process does look a little bit different than last year's. So we'll be walking through some of those differences with you all as a group. And we'll also spend a portion of our presentation on the questions that you have for us and that have been submitted to PCCD. Just a friendly reminder again that you can view all of the questions that we've fielded to date, as well as responses to those questions in the active funding announcement question and answer section of our website. We'll then close with some information on additional funding opportunities offered through PCCD that may be of interest to all of you. So first, just a little bit about our agency. The Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency was established in 1978 through Pennsylvania state law. So we turned 45 this year, and our main function is really serving as the Commonwealth's justice planning and policy making agency. So our mission is really focused on improving safety for communities and for individuals across Pennsylvania. We focus on improving quality coordination and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, facilitating delivery of services to victims of crime, as well as increasing the overall safety of our communities. So we're a pretty small but growing state agency housed within the executive office with about 150 employees who work across 4 different offices. We are collaborative by design, so stakeholder input is actually a central core feature of our DNA here at PCCD. So we're directed by an overarching commission board, which is advised by 7 different advisory committees and 2 training boards who are comprised of diverse experts with a wide range of practical and other sort of knowledge and experience to inform our work and mission. So our responsibilities and programs fall into a number of different areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims compensation, victim services and training, among other responsibilities. So if you're interested in learning more about these areas, would definitely encourage you to check out our website at pccd.pa.gov. So now that you know a little bit more about us, wanted to kind of ground today's discussion in some recent trends that we've seen related to gun and group violence and community violence more broadly in Pennsylvania, just to center the conversation on why this funding is so important. So as you can see on this slide, the line graph down to the right is showing you really the past decade or so of firearm-related deaths, both in Pennsylvania as well as trends nationally. And so you can see that the overall rates of firearm-related deaths have increased quite substantially in the past decade here in Pennsylvania as well as nationally. And those have certainly sharply inclined over the past couple of years since the COVID-19 pandemic. One thing to note, we definitely emphasize gun violence-related deaths, but there's also a huge number of individuals who in Pennsylvania survive firearm-related injuries, and we know that that comes with its own unique set of challenges and opportunities in terms of recovery and healing. So each year, approximately 1,900 Pennsylvanians die from gun-related injuries. A large, substantial portion of that is actually suicide-related deaths, but we have seen a growing share of gun deaths related to homicides in the past couple of years. What the data and research shows us, and what our experience in the field has shown us as well, is gun violence does have different impacts in different communities, and it disproportionately impacts people in communities of color. As you're developing your proposals and as you're thinking about partnerships and the ways that you're going to be structuring your application and initiative, we really encourage applicants to take a look at statewide data sets, local data sets that may be available to you to really strengthen the argument for your program design and for the need for funding in your community. And so we've listed a couple of those data resources for your reference here on this slide. That includes Uniform Crime Reporting data, or UCR data, that's published by our state police. The State Department of Health has a Pennsylvania violent death reporting system that may be of interest. And at PCCD, we've also published some data sets and research reports that we wanted to call to attention. One of those is an examination of crime trends in Pennsylvania covering the period from 2013 to 2022, as well as a recent research report on the cost of non-fatal firearm injuries in Pennsylvania over a 5-year period. So all of that information is available on our website, as well as some other links that you may find helpful. So, certainly a lot of numbers and statistics data is important, but behind each number, we obviously understand that there are real human and incalculable costs to gun violence, both at an individual and a community level. And so this quote is from PCCD's chairman, Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis, who's a real champion for gun violence prevention and brings a tremendous amount of leadership to this work. So he wrote in a recent piece, and just think that this quote is really powerful at describing those kinds of ripple effects that gun violence can have. He says, every time there's a shooting, there are more victims, the people who are killed, people who are injured, family members who are mourning, and survivors who are traumatized, and the community members who are scared to live in the neighborhoods. I know because I was one of those community members. 18 years later, this work is more important than ever. So in addition to being one of PCCD's top strategic priorities, gun violence prevention and reduction is also a significant priority for the Shapiro-Davis administration. And so we're really proud to be able to support this work through the Violence Intervention and Prevention Grant Program, as well as some of our other supported initiatives at the agency. So wanted to give a little bit of an overview and historical look at VIP funding. This will be the 3rd year that we're administering these funds as an agency. So as you all might be aware of, the VIP funding is actually administered by one of those advisory committees that I mentioned earlier. So the School Safety and Security Committee here at PCCD is responsible for the oversight of these funds. And this funding is really primarily designed to support effective local intervening and preventative measures to stop gun and group-related violence, specifically in areas that are experiencing a high rate of violence in Pennsylvania. So this funding has supported a large and growing number of projects over the past 2 years. Around 200 or so projects have been supported with VIP funding to date. And it's supported a pretty significant range of awarded grantees and projects, including everything from smaller, more grassroots projects and organizations, all the way up to larger scale citywide and regional programs, including the Coordinated Community Violence Intervention Strategies pilot program that we'll be focusing on today. So to date, over $150 million in VIP funding has been awarded to organizations and agencies across Pennsylvania. And you can learn more about those projects that we've previously and currently supported through this grant program by checking out the Gun Violence Reduction and VIP Grants Program dashboard that's on PCCD's website. You can also check out our broader grants map online to explore some other initiatives that we've invested in over the years. So one of the primary advantages or distinctions of VIP funding is the fact that it is fairly flexible and can be used for a wide variety of purposes. I mentioned the wide range of programs that have been supported in the first 2 cohorts of VIP grants. And you can see some examples of some of those program and model types on this slide. So really, VIP funds historically and in future years are really designed to address both the root causes as well as impacts of community violence, everything from arts, music, and recreation to victim services, to some more traditional community violence intervention programs such as street outreach and violence interruption or hospital-based violence intervention programs, as well as kind of considering some of the healing and recovery that communities and individuals need. So things like counseling and therapy and behavioral health, trauma-informed approaches, wraparound supports and services, and certainly some elements of crisis response. So again, we're proud of the efforts that we've been able to support through this program. And we really are looking forward to seeing the next round of proposed ideas in this year's funding announcement. So as we'll get into later in our session, VIP funds are guided by eligibility criteria that is prescribed in state law. And those requirements are described in the written VIP funding announcement, which we hope all of you have had the chance to read. So we strongly encourage you to review all of that information and consider how the proposed project activities that you are seeking VIP funds to support align with the VIP grant program's broader goal to, again, prevent and reduce gun and group-related violence in communities in both the short and the long term. So I mentioned that we have supported coordinated community violence intervention pilot sites. That was actually a new feature of last year's grant program. We devoted a portion of available VIP funds to support 5 coordinated community violence intervention pilot sites that are really zeroed in on supporting more comprehensive and collaborative anti-violence strategies that are focused on a specific geographic area. So you can see on this slide the map of where those initial 5 CCVI pilot sites are doing their work. So those areas included 1 site in Allegheny County, 1 in York, another in Delaware County, and then 2 sites in Philadelphia. So again, you can learn more about these projects on our Gun Violence Grants and Funding webpage, which I believe Allie was gracious enough to put in the chat for you all. And, you know, again, this is a pretty brand new initiative. We called it a pilot for a reason. So these 5 sites have just started their implementation this year. And, you know, we've had some early promising results and felt like it would be important to reserve some of our funding to continue this initiative in this year's grant program. So unlike last year, and Zoe will kind of dive into this a little bit more specifically in the next section of our presentation, but last year, coordinated community violence intervention sites were their own separate funding announcement. This year, it's a track under the broader VIP solicitation. So we really want to spend the bulk of today's presentation kind of talking about what distinguishes CCVI from the VIP track, as well as some of those updated application instructions for folks who may have done this last year and are curious about what changed. So with all of that, I'm going to turn things over to Zoe Miner, who will take you through the rest of all of that information. So Zoe, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sam. So like Sam shared, we'll dive into a little bit more of the details that are in the current VIP grant funding announcement. So like Sam shared, this year's VIP funding solicitation has two distinct application tracks, the VIP competitive grants, and of course, number 2, the Coordinated Community Violence Intervention, or CCVI, strategies grants that we're here to focus on and talk about today. A couple of important distinctions between these two tracks that I want to go over. First, the project scope. So the collaborative CVI strategies projects will support comprehensive systems-focused strategies that could entail multiple initiatives and programs developed and implemented with multiple organizations, whereas the VIP competitive grants would be more individualized projects or programs supported by individual organizations or entities. The CCVI projects are designed to provide more intensive place-based investments focused on a contiguous geographic area. So think of a small city or a grouping of neighborhoods within larger cities. By contrast, the VIP grants projects could be much more flexible in their service delivery areas. So thinking about something as small as 1 or 2 blocks to as large as regional or statewide initiatives. Another distinction is while collaboration is encouraged and prioritized across the board with VIP funds, the Coordinated CVI Strategies projects, this is a requirement. It is required that multiple cross-sector partners and coordination as a core feature of funded projects. And as we mentioned before, project designs and activities under the VIP track can align with a wide range of VIP eligible activities, models, and approaches. There's a lot of flexibility. The CCVI strategies proposals, on the other hand, must meet specific prescribed project activities and deliverables that are unique to this track. So for example, identifying a lead organization, engaging in needs-based planning activities, and more details that we'll cover throughout this presentation. Again, always helpful reminder, Sam and I will probably say this a few times, more detailed information about each of these tracks is available in the written funding announcement. And then specifically want to call out the appendix that is included in that funding announcement that provides details specifically on this track. Another thing that is important to note is that applicants may only submit one application under this funding announcement. So that means you can't come in under both tracks. That said, nothing prohibits an organization from making direct application and also being included as a proposed subrecipient in another eligible applicant's proposal. You should take care to ensure all funding requested, whether directly or otherwise, is not duplicative and aligns with funding requirements. And one final important note, which applies for all VIP funding, as with all PCCD grants, VIP funding is contingent upon availability and authorization of funds. So a few key specifics to share about the CCVI track. So first off, the CCVI track is more comprehensive in nature, engaging multiple systems and partners to implement intervention strategies in response to needs within a specific geographic area. The maximum amount an applicant can request in state grant funds is up to $3 million total. The project period is the same as VIP. It is up to 36 months, but this doesn't mean that the project must be this long, but the project can be. Applicants should plan for an approval process time period as well as time for planning, especially under this track, and project implementation. And another important thing to note specifically under this track is that there is a match requirement. So 10% of the requested grant funds in year 2, and this is increasing to 25% of grant funds requested in year 3. And another thing that I want to emphasize is that PCCD does not plan on funding more than 2 to 3 projects under this track. It is also important to keep in mind that this track has additional requirements that we will cover in this presentation, like I mentioned before. So now that we've covered how much funding CCVI grants can apply for and other specifics, let's talk a little bit about who can make application under the solicitation. So as you can see here, nonprofit organizations with 501c3 status, institutions of higher education, municipalities, counties, and district attorney's offices are eligible to make direct application for VIP funding. We've received a number of questions about eligible applicants in the weeks since the solicitation opened, and I want to cover a few of those details here. So please note, district attorney's offices can make application and submit a request for VIP funds in SurveyMonkey, but if they are recommended for funding, they will need to have their county submit a formal application in our eGrant system in order for us to proceed with an award. In addition, counties and municipalities must make direct application. So an individual department, agency, or office, so for example, health department, law enforcement agency, probation and parole, etc., may not come in on its own, but they can be included as proposed subrecipients within a county or municipality's VIP or CCVI application. As with past solicitations, while we strongly encourage applicants to consider collaborative and coordinated proposals, PCC will consider applications submitted by different departments within an institution of higher education or university. Current PCCD grantees, including VIP grantees, are eligible to request funding through this year's solicitation and will be asked to describe the impact of their current previous projects. And so this is covered in detail in the funding announcement, but I did want to bring this to your attention. Additionally, for this year's funding announcement, there are a few priority consideration areas for funding, including 2 new priority areas. The first one is really emphasizing this coordination track. So applicants seeking funding to support collaborative projects co-designed and co-implemented with multiple partners who are included as proposed subrecipients. This was technically a new priority, but certainly covered under our coordinated CVI efforts. Another one that is a priority consideration is applicants who have not previously received funding from PCCD to support violence prevention and reduction efforts. Another factor is to support continuation of current successful projects whose current VIP grant awards have ended or are ending as of July 31st, 2024. This is a new priority for this year. And then, of course, priority consideration will be given to proposed initiatives that would take place in zip codes or municipalities with the highest rates of gun violence, other violent crime, and other need-based factors. So please note, we did want to highlight the priority consideration areas, but if you are a current VIP grant that has funding that continues after January 31st, 2024, so for example, maybe your funding ends in June of 2024, you're still eligible to apply for funds under this year's funding solicitation. We'll remind you guys this maybe a few more times, and please read through the funding announcement and the Q&A document in full for all consideration that goes into funding decisions. So you'll see on this slide, we do highlight cross-sector partners. So since partnerships are a requirement, we wanted to provide some examples. This list is not all-inclusive, but it should provide an idea of what collaborations we're seeking. So I'll just name a few on this slide. Community-based organizations like youth-serving organizations. This could include faith-based organizations, health and human services organizations, victim services, local law enforcement, education, community and economic development, as well as arts, recreation, and public spaces. And just important to note, as you'll see on your screen, for all of your project partners, letters of support or similar documentation showing their buy-in to the project are required for all named project partners. So for those interested in applying under the CCVI track, it's important to be aware of what CVI approaches typically involved. Although we expect the proposals and use of funds requested to be specific to the gaps and needs in the specific geographic area of choice. For example, more rural communities have different needs than more urban settings. You might be familiar with some of these approaches already. Some of you even have aspects of this list within your current VIP grants or CCVI grants, but let's go through them together. So under CVI, trusted credible messengers and practitioners responsible for delivering intervention strategies. Full partnerships with representatives of the affected community or communities who provide input and help shape the interventions approach. A focus on people with the highest risk of violence involvement in the near term. Data from multiple sources, so example, law enforcement, social services, that are vetted for accuracy and attention to racial, ethnic, economic, and other biases. Trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practices focused on the impact of trauma on individuals and the broader population in historically under-invested communities. Facilitating partnerships and relationships among a wide range of public, private, and community stakeholders impacted by violence to prevent violence, strengthen community resilience, and build social capital networks. And driven by a commitment to racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic equity, recognizing the various social, demographic, economic, and system or structural factors that drive and perpetuate community violence, and bringing resources and responses directly to people and places with the greatest need. We certainly want to encourage all CCVI interested applicants to review information on community violence intervention. There is a link that works from that highlighted yellow underlined area on this slide. So as I mentioned before, if you are applying under the CVI track, there are additional requirements than the VIP track. So number one, a lead agency must be identified. This agency is responsible for ensuring all grant-related objectives and deliverables are being met throughout the course of the project. This does include PCCD reporting and performance-related requirements. Additionally, this agency is responsible for ensuring coordination among the project partners. It is not simply a relationship where the partner agencies report to the lead agency. More on coordination expectations can be found in the appendix of the funding announcement. Running a CCVI project takes a lot of work, planning, and collaboration. It is incumbent on the lead agency and partner organizations to ensure the project is sufficiently staffed and supported. We of course understand if hiring delays occur or if turnover occurs, as that is a natural part of operating any kind of organization. However, it is expected that either current staff or new staff will be hired to support this effort. And please note, applicants should attach resumes, or cover letters of key personnel who will contribute to the project, and or position description or summary of key responsibilities for other key personnel who will coordinate and lead this initiative. And this should be clear as part of your submission package of the staff that would be supporting this effort. Lastly, it will be imperative that your organization, if approved, is prepared to work closely with the technical assistance and research and evaluation partners identified by PCCD for this effort. This is a requirement. I cannot emphasize this enough. This could include, but is not limited to, frequent meetings, virtual and in person, additional activities being asked of you, surveys, etc., and additional work that should be expected as part of this effort. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the specific types of activities and expenses that VIP grant funding can support, especially as you all are developing your budgets. As you can see on this slide and in the written funding announcement, VIP grant funding can be used for a variety of costs, including personnel, salaries and benefits, contractors or consultants, facilitating referrals to community-based programs and services, including incentives and stipends for participants, supplies and equipment, training, travel and transportation related expenses, including vehicle leases and other activities. VIP grant funds cannot be used for physical security or infrastructure related costs, often referred to as hardening strategies, such as security cameras, building modifications, etc. Funds also can't be used for construction or land acquisition, lobbying or political contributions, honoraria or bonuses, vehicle purchases, or any expenses that fall significantly outside of the funding announcement scope. And please note, PCCD does have final approval of all final budgets and can ask you to remove something if you get asked to submit an e-grants application as part of the next stage if your project is recommended for an award. And at this time, always a helpful reminder, due to the competitive nature of the funds, we cannot comment on specific expenses for your projects or specific project proposals, but we'll do our best to help clarify these eligible and ineligible expenses if you have any questions. So one significant change from last year's VIP grant solicitation that we wanted to be sure to cover is that there is now a cap on the total amount of indirect costs you can come in for. Because this year's VIP solicitation is 100% state funded, federally approved indirect rates do not apply. Indirect costs are limited to 10% of what we call, or what's called, modified total direct costs, or MTDC for short. So how do you calculate this MTDC? MTDC only includes those expenses shown under the first column on this slide, so salaries, wages, fringe benefits, materials and supplies, services, travel, and up to $25,000 for each subaward. They don't include costs in the second column, equipment, capital expenditures, rent, tuition remission, or subaward portions exceeding $25,000. It is important to note that admin costs need to be clearly justified as direct project costs, or they will be considered as indirect and count toward the maximum 10% indirect rate. So this next slide provides a simple example of how you would calculate MTDC. So please notice that the rent and gift cards as research incentives were not included as part of the indirect calculation. I really did want to emphasize the fact that this slide is a simplified version of the budget simply to just show a calculation of MTDC. It should not be considered an example for the narrative templates. Detailed calculations and justification will be required for each line item. So we certainly wanted to touch on the match requirement. That is a requirement under the CCVI Funding Strategies Grants Program. Here's a simple example of how you would calculate the match requirement. So as stated previously, 10% of the requested grant funds in year 2 and increasing to 25% of grant funds requested in year 3. Your request only includes the total state grant funds requested. So I'll just pause for a moment on this slide to let this example sink in. If you need additional description or definition of what is required in the cash match, this match requirement, we certainly encourage you to review thoroughly the appendix that can be found on page 15 of the funding announcement. And something I do want to note, PCCD funds cannot be used as a match for another PCCD grant. So now we want to touch on, like Sam mentioned before, we know that the application process for this year has changed slightly from last year. So we wanted to touch on what needs to happen for you all to successfully apply. So we wanted to specifically point out the documents you should review for drafting your application, as well as documents that you will be required to develop and submit as part of your SurveyMonkey application. All the documents and resources you'll need are available on the Gun Violence Grants and Funding webpage. The link is in the chat and in the funding announcement. So a few things I want to run through. Please read through the funding announcement in its entirety. We've mentioned that maybe to nauseam in this presentation, but I can't emphasize that enough. Read and reference the application checklist as you work on your application. We recommend you even print it out and check it off as you go. That might feel really good as you're continuing to work on your application to prepare for your submission. Certainly read through the SurveyMonkey questions to prepare your responses outside of SurveyMonkey so you can fully prepare for when you are submitting your actual SurveyMonkey initial request form. And then read through and save as the CCVI track proposal narrative to prepare your responses to submit your finalized proposal narrative. This must be attached in your SurveyMonkey submission, and we'll talk a little bit more about this new application requirement in just a little bit. So what exactly are the steps to applying? So step 1, like I said, review and prepare responses to the proposal narrative template. If you are applying under the CCVI track, please be sure to review and complete that template. There is a different template for the VIP track. The funding announcement will be handy to reference as you are working on this. Second, start to get the support letters or other documentation you will need to submit with your proposal, including resumes of key personnel for your organization or your partner organizations. Then complete the SurveyMonkey form. Be sure to have all your attachments ready so this can be as easy as possible. You can reference the SurveyMonkey question summary document on PCCD's website to get a sense of the information you'll need to provide and upload when you're ready for this step. So of course, it might be obvious, but please make sure you actually submit your SurveyMonkey. Please note SurveyMonkey will not send you a confirmation email after you hit the done or submit button. The submission page shown on your screen will verify that your initial request form has been submitted. If it helps, just for confirmation, it might be helpful to take a screenshot for your records. So some of you might be thinking that what really happens after we apply. How long will we have to wait? So all applicants will receive notification in March 2024 of the status of their application, subject to the availability and authorization of funds. Approved grantees will be provided guidance on next steps to complete a full application in eGrants. So again, I really want to emphasize here that if you are an approved applicant, the eGrants is the platform that must be used for organizations to receive funding. PCCD staff will be available to assist you with this, and the eGrants application must be submitted within 45 days. And just to be explicitly clear, the due date is Thursday, January 18th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So now we wanted to go over the CCVI template a little bit and where maybe you guys might want to focus some of your time. So if you give me a moment, I'm going to turn things over to Sam and we'll have the Word documents that we can reference.
Great. Thanks, Zoe. While Zoe's getting that teed up, just wanted to set a little bit of context for why we moved in this direction in terms of having a proposal narrative. Obviously, SurveyMonkey has a lot of advantages to it. It's a pretty straightforward template or application system. And so we really heard a little bit of feedback from applicants and grantees last year that as much as people love the simplicity of SurveyMonkey, sometimes it doesn't exactly allow for a ton of creative flexibility in terms of presenting information, including things like images or graphics or other types of sort of supplemental materials. So we went in a slightly different direction this year based on that feedback. So there's still obviously the SurveyMonkey form questions that Zoe just mentioned. Really encourage you to take a look at the reference document. It's a PDF document that lists out all of the things that you're going to be expected to provide information-wise in the main SurveyMonkey form. But what you're seeing on Zoe's screen now is the proposal narrative template that's specific to the CCVI track. So make sure you're opening the right one. There's a separate one for VIP track applicants. And just a couple of things to kind of note about this document. So first and foremost, this is something that you have creativity and flexibility in terms of how you approach this, with a couple of parameters built around that. So you have to make sure it's no more than 15 pages max, and that it is in a readable font. So something 12 points and double spaced to aid in the readability of your proposal. Standard 1-inch margins for folks who do grant writing quite a bit, that should be pretty normal. But if you have a favorite font, if you're looking at this template and you're thinking, I really don't have love in my heart for Times New Roman, that's perfectly fine. You can pick one that you prefer that's just as readable. Just wanted to also say, in addition to things like fonts, you can certainly change up the structure of this template to suit your needs. We just want to make sure that you're clearly labeling your sections so that it's obvious to the reviewers that you've covered each of the required 12 sections in your proposal narrative. So I said 15 pages max, and 12 sections in 15 pages, it's not a ton of real estate. So we're really looking for applicants to devote a significant portion of what they put in this proposal narrative to certainly address the prompts that are in here. But you should really think about and consider the information that you need to provide in this document versus what you can supply in other parts of your application. So I mentioned the SurveyMonkey form questions. That's going to ask for a lot of basics about your organization, who's lead on the proposal, that kind of thing. Think about the use of supplemental attachments. Zoe mentioned that CCVI applicants have to provide letters of support from named partners, as well as resumes or other types of sort of documentation around the personnel who will support the project. So just as one example, maybe you're not devoting quite as much to bio sketches in this proposal narrative because you don't have a ton of space to work with. Our recommendation would be, as Zoe is sort of skimming through, you can see that we're asking about certainly information about your organization's experience and capacity and capabilities. You are going to have to identify kind of your lead agency, which is the applicant, and your partners, where the projects will take place, who the project will focus on specifically, as well as community need. So those are all really important topics, obviously, but if you're thinking about kind of where to devote the bulk of your real estate, for lack of a better term, we would really recommend that for proposal narratives, the vast majority, a significant majority of what you're going to be spending your page real estate on is the project design and implementation plan section of this proposal narrative. So the reason for that is, at the end of the day, what a proposal narrative is designed to do is give reviewers and scorers a really clear picture of what exactly grant funding and match funding would be used to support over the course of the project. One of the other things that we definitely encourage you to check out, even before you begin this, I just dropped it in the chat. There's a community-based violence intervention and prevention initiative implementation checklist that was published by the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance recently. You can see in the project design and implementation plan prompt that that's a referenced resource because you're going to be asked and needing to explicitly address how your proposed project design aligns with CVI guiding principles and approaches. So that is a little new. If you were an applicant last year on coordinated CVI strategies projects, we're really trying to ask applicants this year to be very explicit and clear about how funding is going to be used to support strategies that align with that CVI framework. And so you should be really intentional about kind of describing throughout your narrative where project activities will take place, who they will take place with, how the program was hopefully collaboratively designed and will be collaboratively implemented, are all tying back to those principles of community-centeredness, equity, inclusivity, evidence-informed, and certainly tying into how the program will be effective and hopefully sustained in the long run. So, the name of the solicitation or this track hopefully is very obvious. We are looking for coordinated and collaborative proposals. So you should really describe kind of the partnerships you're planning to use, who will be doing what in terms of the project's implementation and design. And I think it's really important, for applicants to take some time to describe, how you're going to do outreach, engagement, referral processes, for your organization as well as your partners. And also the method or methods that you're going to be using to make sure that programming or services are available and accessible for people who are at the highest risk of experiencing community violence. So we certainly know that, prevention strategies, long-term healing strategies, those are really, really important. But I think an emphasis of this track in particular is on reaching people who are at the highest and most immediate risk of violence involvement, whether as perpetrators, victims, or both. And so that's really, I think, something we wanted to emphasize with applicants in this webinar, our time together today, and hopefully comes through clear from both our funding announcement as well as this proposal template. So I mentioned earlier, certainly there's some other key information. Definitely check this out before you start writing. But would encourage you to also think about what information needs to be conveyed kind of in language narrative versus things that you can use other sort of methods of communication to relay. So think about maybe how a timeline might be in a table format or a visual format instead of maybe a paragraph, since again, you are working in a pretty tight page limit. One thing to note, be as creative as you can. You certainly have flexibility, but SurveyMonkey will not accept attachments that exceed 16 megabytes. So just pay attention as you're developing that proposal narrative to make sure that as you're creating something beautiful, that it's also something that you can actually upload to that system. So with all of that being said, page limit of 15 max does not include anything that you're submitting as part of your budget tables and narrative. Those have their own page limitations. So I'm going to let Zoe kind of walk you through what you should think about when you get to that section. But just want to emphasize, before I turn the mic over, that this is really an opportunity for you to tell the story of why this project is necessary, what it will look like from start to finish. And just, we really are looking forward to reading some strong proposals. If you have questions or run into any challenges with this, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll talk a little bit about WestEd and the Pennsylvania Peace Alliance in just a bit, but they are actually hosting an office hours. So I put the information in the chat. That will take place on January 3rd, 2024 at 3 p.m. So that would be a really great opportunity if you're kind of thinking through early drafts of your proposal narrative or just thinking about the structure of your proposal in general. Would definitely encourage you to check out that resource and plan to attend that event. I think it'll be a really great opportunity to strengthen your approach and hopefully reduce some stress on the application approach. So I'll stop talking there. Zoe, you want to cover the budget piece?
Yes, absolutely. So I did want to share in the Word document how you can, I know we describe it in the instructions, but really show you how you can easily just copy and paste the table. So you probably saw I clicked anywhere in the table, and then in the upper left, there's that symbol that will appear. You can click on that to then hit copy, and then I'm just going to paste it like right below just to show you how to do that. And it'll copy exactly how that table looks. I also wanted to show how simple it is to just type in your amounts. And of course, please note for the purposes of this webinar, I'm keeping this really, really simple just to show you, how we expect to see things in the budget. And then I also want to show a pretty cool feature in Word because we understand maybe a lot of budgets are getting developed in other applications, like maybe using Excel, or maybe you utilize like Google Sheets or something like that. But one really cool feature about Word and using a table in Word is you actually can make the table do the work for you for your summations. And so if you go to the layout in your ribbon above, there is formula that you can click on, and it'll say, oh, okay, you want me to sum what's above? Yes, please. It summed that. And just to show you too, it is not simply just for summing the columns. It can also sum the rows. So I just want to show what that looks like as well. And it easily added that up. So just wanted to show that cool feature of Word, and hopefully that provides ease of being able to manipulate the tables in the way that you need, especially because we know that you will need to do multiple tables to show the budgets for the required project partners. And I want to talk a little bit briefly about what we would expect when it comes to your proposed budget descriptions that you can see here. We have these categories. These are categories that are representative of what we have in our eGrant system. And I'm going to jump back to our presentation that does show the budget on your screen. So kind of like Sam said, the budget is also an opportunity to really paint a clear picture of what is happening in each budget category and why, and how it relates to your project. So after you write your responses to some of the descriptions in each of these budget categories, you might want to ask yourself, will PCCD or the PCCD's reviewers understand how these budget items relate to the project implementation? So you might want to think about that. And I do want to emphasize that the table and the proposed budget description for each of the categories will be required for each budget table for each project partner. So again, I do just want to say this one more time. The narrative of your proposed budget categories and your items that you're including by line item should paint a clear picture of how they relate to the project implementation section, and we should be able to draw a clear picture of how they're integral to the success of the project. So like Sam mentioned, if you have questions as your organization is pulling together your application, we encourage you to check out the resources available through the PA Peace Alliance. Some of you might be familiar with this already. This technical assistance initiative provides free training and technical assistance to organizations working to prevent and reduce community violence. You can check out the online resource library, which features research, tools, checklists, podcast videos, and other violence prevention and intervention resources on demand. In addition, groups can request technical assistance on a variety of topics, including how to navigate the application process. For more information, please visit the papeacealliance.org. In addition, questions about the fiscal year 23 VIP grants funding announcement and application process can also be submitted to PCCD staff via email at ra-cd-vipgrants@pa.gov. Questions will be reviewed, answered, and posted on our active funding announcement webpage for reference as staff are able to process. So very quickly, because I want to be sure to leave some time for the questions that you guys are asking us in real time during this webinar. But we wanted to cover a few things of frequently asked questions, as well as the multiple ways that you can ask us questions. So of course, today's webinar, like I mentioned before, sending an email to that resource account, always referencing that PCCD's funding announcement Q&A webpage. We update that Q&A as frequently as we possibly can, but maybe saving that as a favorite in your browser as you're working on your proposal to just keep seeing if any questions that you might have are getting responded to. And we encourage you to check that Q&A before submitting a question to the resource account. We might have answered it already or answered a form of the specific question that you have that might assist with the question that you might be thinking about. And again, just can't emphasize enough doing this throughout the development of your application. So we wanted to cover a few questions specific to the CCVI funding announcement before jumping into the Q&A portion of our presentation. A lot of the CCVI projects just got off the ground. So just thinking about that when it comes to question 2, you might want to consider this if you need additional funds for services. You might want to consider the entirety of the funding announcement, and please keep in mind that you will be asked to provide information on current successes of programming under this track. I did want to note the first FAQ, if for whatever reason you are having issues with the Word document, getting them to download, please don't hesitate to reach out to the resource account. And then there's 3 other ones that provide information on some things to consider as you're considering making applications specifically under this track. And I do want to highlight again that as a reminder, under this track specifically, PCCD does not anticipate funding more than 2 to 3 projects as part of the solicitation. And these next questions, I don't want to spend too much time on them, again, because I want to make sure we have time to answer as many questions as we can for you guys. But these questions pertain to being important if you are an approved applicant, of things to consider if you were to submit an application at eGrants. So one thing that I did just want to emphasize before jumping to our Q&A portion is just emphasizing the fact that PCCD grants are reimbursement only. So with that, we can open into our Q&A portion of our webinar.
All righty, thanks, Zoe. So for the first question, I think we're going to let Sam tackle this one. It is from Mark, and the question is, what is the reason for requiring matching funds for the CCVI grants?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say, just broadly speaking, match funding requirements, we tend to use them thoughtfully at PCCD, so it's not something that's typically part of our standard funding announcements. But the reason we included it for the coordinated CVI strategies track this year and in last year's separate solicitation is that these are large investments of dollars, so $3 million. For single projects. And I think, one of the sort of challenges or dynamics that we were paying attention to is that, if you really want cross-system collaboration, the types of coordinated activities that we're looking to invest in and support through this grant opportunity, we really think it's important for local partners to kind of put some of their own resources to bear to support and invest in this work that goes beyond a 3-year project period. So a lot of the strategies that we're going to be supporting through this track are comprehensive. They're going to take a bit to get up and running if they're not already in place. They're going to take thoughtful planning and preparation. And so we really want the emphasis to be on the long-term aspect of this work. And that's why we felt it would be necessary and helpful to have that match requirement. We did tweak it a bit. So Zoe described, it's now kind of more of a phased in match requirement as opposed to an immediate upfront in year 1 requirement. And that was largely based on feedback that we got from the early cohort of CCVI pilot sites. And so, lots of flexibility that you have on how you meet that match requirement. It can be in-kind resources, cash match, but just think it's important for local jurisdictions and partners to really be investing their own resources in these efforts to hopefully keep that work going beyond the end of the grant period.
Awesome, thanks, Sam. Next question from Bianca. Aside from the CCVI necessity of collaboration, can you speak on the exact distinction between the CCVI and VIP grant tracks?
Yeah, I can take a crack at it, and then Zoe should feel free to jump in if she wants to say more. But I mean, in addition to some of the logistics of what we're expecting from applicants and eventually grantees, like the cash match, for example, like the questions that we're asking you to address in the proposal narratives, these are much more intensive investments in an entire community or a single geographic area, and so the expectation with these projects is that they aren't sort of a single one-off initiative that has one organization with its own program that maybe has some partners, but it's really something that's just kind of like it's off on its own, sort of doing its own specific thing. This is really designed to assess where a community's gaps currently are. And that's going to be a conversation that is going to require a lot of different folks to be around the table. And again, if those tables aren't already in place, this is a funding opportunity that can help you do that kind of planning to really come up with that roadmap for your specific community and then devote resources to addressing those gaps. And it's really centered on the intervention aspect of community violence intervention in a way that our VIP track, that's a lot more flexible and broad. So I mentioned earlier when we were going through the proposal narrative that prevention certainly has its place. But with the coordinated CVI strategies, we're really looking for proposals that are focusing on violence that is currently occurring in communities, who's involved with that right now, and what are the strategies that a community wants to put in place to really effectively intervene and stop violence in the short and the long term. So I would say, the scope of it's a little different. The requirements are certainly very different. The scale of it is different. And so that's sort of the distinguishing features of this track versus the regular VIP track. Zoe, anything you'd want to add or clarify on that?
You kind of hit the main points that I wanted to share, and I did just want to say this. So although for the other VIP track, certainly getting free technical assistance from our TA provider is going to be an option. One difference is that under the CCVI strategies grant, it is a requirement. So they will sort of be thought of also as being a project partner that you would be working with very frequently, depending on the needs of your organization and the specifics of your project in its entirety.
Awesome. Thanks, ladies. That covers our submitted questions. So back to you.
Awesome. One moment.
All right, so as we wrap for today, thanks for submitting those questions. If you have a question that you either weren't able to get to or you think of it later, definitely encourage you to send an email to our resource account. Our team will be monitoring those and happy to answer those questions if they come up. And again, please mark your calendars for that technical assistance event with our West Ed friends. I think that'll be super helpful for you as you're considering the CCVI track. So we did want to spend a minute on one of the additional gun violence related funding opportunities that's actually currently open. So Zoe, if you tick to the next slide. So the deadline's coming up on this, but wanted to make folks aware that we actually have a number of funding streams at PCCD that can be used for gun violence and group violence related projects. But one of those is the Burn State Crisis Intervention Program, which is a relatively new federal funding stream that our agency administers. So our SCIP local solicitation opened last month. And that is about $3.5 million in federal SCIP funds, specifically designated for local units of government. So if you're a county or a municipality or you work with them, just know that this is an opportunity that may be of interest. I mentioned the application due date's coming up. It's December 20th. But just wanted to highlight that, this funding stream is really focused on some of the priority areas that are in Pennsylvania's 2022 Burn State Crisis Intervention Program funding plan that was approved by the feds earlier this year. And it centers on three areas. that certainly have some overlaps, I think, with some of the CCVI and VIP work that we support, but really focused in on crisis intervention services and supports and some of the intersections that might have for people and communities experiencing gun violence, as well as improving coordination of services and responses to gun violence victimization. And then last but certainly not least, addressing the intersection of domestic violence and intimate partner violence with gun violence. So you can learn more on our active funding announcements webpage. The gun violence funding page that we've been referencing a lot in this webinar also includes information on the Burn Skip funding plan. We are anticipating some more funding opportunities to be released in the coming year that is tied to that funding plan. So definitely encourage you to sign up for grant notifications so that you can be made aware of those as they become available. So with that, we are officially at our time. It's just shy of noon. We just want to thank everybody for your time, for your attention, and for your interest today. We know it's a busy time of year and there's a lot going on. So appreciate you taking a little bit of your day to spend it with us. We look forward to reviewing your proposals. We wish you the best of luck in the application process. Please don't hesitate to let us know if there's anything we can do to support you. And with that, hope you have a great rest of the day and a great holiday season.